Vivian Blackwood pointed one manicured finger at Evelyn's face and said, in front of 30 people who controlled half the criminal wealth on the eastern seaboard, "You are nothing. You are always nothing. And tonight, my son is finally free of you." No one moved. No one spoke. Lucian Blackwood, the man whose name made grown men sweat through their shirts, stood 6 feet away and looked at the floor. That was the moment. Not the divorce papers, not the months of silence before them. That finger, that room, that silence from the one man who could have stopped it. If that were you, standing in a room full of power, publicly gutted by the woman who was supposed to be your family, while your husband said nothing, what would you do? Would you cry? Would you beg? Would you fight back? Evelyn Carter did none of those things. She picked up her suitcase and she walked out into the rain. But before you assume you know how this story ends, stay with me. Because the woman they just threw away? Her father's plane landed 40 minutes ago. And when Alexander Carter finds out what happened to his daughter tonight, the Blackwood family will spend the rest of their lives wishing they had never learned her last name. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow the story all the way to the end. You will not want to miss what happens next. And do me a favor, drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the night that broke everything. The rain started around 9. It came in sideways off the Hudson, the kind of cold that got into your collar before you realized your coat wasn't enough. The Blackwood estate sat on 40 acres above the valley, lit up from the inside like something out of a magazine. All stone and glass and iron gates that slid open only when someone with the right last name was coming through. Evelyn had lived inside those gates for 6 years. She knew which floorboard creaked on the east staircase. She knew that the study fireplace needed its flue adjusted every October, or it would smoke. She knew Lucian took his coffee without sugar, even though he always reached for the sugar bowl first, a habit left over from childhood he never managed to break. She knew these things because she had paid attention, because paying attention was what she did when the person you loved didn't know how to let you in all the way. She knew everything about that house. She was carrying one suitcase. The bedroom had taken her 11 minutes to pack, not because she was in a hurry. Vivian had given her until 10 o'clock, which was generous in the way that a cat is generous with a mouse, but because 11 minutes was all it took. 6 years, and she had accumulated almost nothing that was hers alone. Most of what she owned was tangled up with Lucian's world in ways that made it impossible to separate cleanly. Clothes she'd bought for functions she attended for his benefit, jewelry she'd worn to signal alliance at tables where she was the only woman. A few books, a photograph from her father's place upstate that she'd kept in the nightstand drawer where nobody would ask about it. She packed the photograph last. The hallway outside the master suite was quiet when she came out. The noise from downstairs was contained, controlled, the way everything in the Blackwood household was controlled, but she could feel it through the floor. 30 people minimum, Lucian's inner circle, his mother's circle, several faces from the financial side of his operation that Evelyn had spent years learning to read. Tonight was supposed to be about closing a deal with the Marchetti Group out of Chicago. The divorce was a footnote, a piece of housekeeping scheduled for the margins of a bigger evening. That was what Vivian had called it 2 weeks ago when she handed Evelyn a summary of the settlement terms in a sealed envelope at the breakfast table. Housekeeping, she'd said. Nothing dramatic. We're not that kind of family. Evelyn had taken the envelope, gone upstairs, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without opening it. Not because she was afraid of what was inside, because she was trying to decide how much of what she felt was grief, and how much was something older and colder that had no name yet. She opened it eventually. The terms were what she expected. A number that looked generous until you calculated what 6 years of her time and intelligence had been worth to his operation. A clause about non-disclosure. A clause about non-association with his business interests going forward, which she found almost funny given that half his business interests existed because of frameworks she'd quietly helped him build. She'd signed it 3 days later. Didn't negotiate. Didn't ask for anything else. That had bothered Vivian, Evelyn could tell. The old woman wanted a fight, wanted something she could use to justify the narrative she'd already written. Evelyn hadn't given her one. She reached the top of the main staircase and looked down at the entrance hall. Marble floors. The portrait of Lucian's grandfather on the left wall, a man who had built the first of the family's criminal infrastructure in the 50s and been celebrated for it ever since. The chandelier above throwing light in all directions, clean and expensive and cold. Lucian was at the bottom of the stairs. He was in a dark suit, holding a glass of something he hadn't touched, and he was looking up at her the way a man looks at something he's already decided to stop thinking about. Not cruel, not warm, just finalized. She came down the stairs. The suitcase handle was warm in her palm from where she'd been gripping it. He didn't move. "Evelyn," he said. "Lucian." That was it. 6 years, and that was the whole conversation in the hallway. She could see in his face that he'd had something prepared, something that would have made this easier for him to live with. But whatever it was had died somewhere between thought and speech, and he was left with just her name. She walked past him toward the main room. She could have gone straight to the door. In fact, she had planned to. Walk through, get in the car, be gone before the rain got worse. But something in the sound of that room, 30 people who knew her, who had sat at her table, eaten food she'd arranged, benefited from intelligence she'd quietly provided, pulled her sideways into the doorway. She didn't go in. She just stood there a moment. Vivian saw her first. The woman was 71 years old and had the posture of someone who had practiced being formidable in front of a mirror every day since her 30s. She wore dark red, which she always did for important evenings, and she was holding court near the fireplace with 3 of the Marchetti associates and 2 women whose husbands ran the financial holding companies the Blackwoods used for their legitimate operations. When Vivian's eyes landed on Evelyn in the doorway, something shifted in them. It wasn't contempt exactly. It was worse than that. It was the look of someone who had waited a long time for a particular moment and was now savoring the arrival of it. "Gentlemen," Vivian said, not loudly but not quietly either. Loud enough. "Ladies, a moment." The room went quiet faster than Evelyn expected. Vivian crossed toward her, and the 30 people in that room rearranged themselves in subtle ways, turning bodies, lifting chins, creating a kind of accidental theater that Vivian was very good at manufacturing. "Evelyn." She stopped 6 feet away. "I see you're on your way out." "I am," Evelyn said. "Good." Vivian let the words sit alone for a second. "I want you to know something before you go. I want you to hear it clearly so there's no confusion later about what this family thinks." Evelyn looked at her. She didn't say anything. "You brought nothing to this family," Vivian said. Her voice was level, factual, the way someone reads figures from a page. 6 years, not a child, not a connection worth mentioning, not a dollar of your own. You had nothing when my son found you, and you have nothing now that he's letting you go." She paused. "He made a mistake taking you. Youth is forgivable. He was young, but it's done now, and you'll understand if we don't pretend otherwise." Evelyn was aware of her own heartbeat, aware of the feel of the suitcase handle, the sound of the rain against the windows, the particular quality of silence in a room where 30 people are deciding whether to look at you or at the floor. Most of them chose the floor. She looked past Vivian, found Lucian against the far wall. He was looking at her now. Not at the floor, at her. And she searched his face for something. Not rescue. She had stopped waiting for rescue a long time ago. But something. Some small thing. He didn't move. He held her eyes for 3 seconds. 4. Then he looked away. That was the moment. That was the one she'd carry. Not the words. The looking away. "Finished?" Evelyn asked Vivian. The old woman blinked. She'd expected something else. Tears, maybe. Or anger. Something to validate what she'd said. "Finished," Evelyn confirmed, answering herself, and turned toward the front door. She heard Vivian say something behind her, a small, satisfied sound that wasn't quite a laugh. And then the room exhaled and conversation resumed, and Evelyn Blackwood, née Carter, was already in the entrance hall, already moving, already past the portrait of the grandfather, already through the front door and into the cold. The rain hit her face immediately. The car she'd arranged was at the far end of the circular drive. A black sedan, nothing showy, hired through a service that had no connection to the Blackwood operation. She'd planned that deliberately. She wanted nothing of his touching the next part of her life. She was halfway down the front steps when her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She stopped. The number on the screen had a country code she recognized before she registered the digits. She stood in the rain, one hand on the phone, suitcase at her feet, and she answered. "Evelyn." The voice was calm, low, the kind of voice that had learned a long time ago that it didn't need to be loud to be heard. Your father's plane landed 40 minutes ago at Teterboro. He wants to see you. She looked back at the lit windows of the Blackwood estate. She could see silhouettes inside moving around, the evening continuing, Lucian's empire rotating on its axis like nothing had happened. For the first time all night, she felt something loosen in her chest. Tell him I'll be there by midnight, she said. She picked up her suitcase. She walked to the car. She did not look back again. The drive down from the estate took 20 minutes on roads made dark and slick by the storm. Evelyn sat in the back seat with the suitcase between her feet and her phone face down on the seat beside her. The driver was a man named Thomas, who had worked for her father's household for 11 years, and who had been the one who called her. He didn't speak during the drive. He understood what kind of silence this was. She watched the valley below them as they descended, the lights of the small town scattered across the dark like something dropped and not yet picked up. She'd looked at this view so many times from the estate's upper windows that it felt strange to be seeing it from below, from inside it, passing through instead of looking down. Her hands were steady. She noticed that with a detached kind of interest. She had expected to feel worse than this. Or differently. She had expected some collapse to arrive once the front door was behind her, some private dissolution she'd been holding back all evening. But what she felt instead was a kind of stripped clarity, the way the air feels after lightning, when everything non-essential has been burned off and what's left is just the ground and the sky and the basic shape of things. She thought about Vivian's voice, the level, factual tone. Nothing when you came, nothing when you go. She thought about Lucian's face when he looked away. Then she stopped thinking about both of them and looked at her phone instead. 3 messages had come in while she was in the car, 2 from numbers she didn't recognize, probably people from the evening who'd heard something and were reaching out before they knew what had actually happened. 1 from her father's assistant confirming the car would be waiting at Teterboro. She replied to the assistant, ignored the others. She had not spoken to Alexander Carter in 3 months. Not because they were estranged, they had never been estranged, not truly, but because the life she'd built inside the Blackwood estate had required a kind of compartmentalization that was easier to maintain if she kept the 2 worlds apart. She told herself that was practical. She wondered now if it had also been a form of protection, though for whom she wasn't sure. Her father knew more about the Blackwood operation than Lucian would have been comfortable with. She'd never told him details. She wouldn't have done that. It wasn't how she was built. But Alexander Carter was a man who learned things about people without asking. He had resources, and he had patience, and he had a network of relationships that operated so far above the level of visible power that most people didn't know it existed. He had known, from the beginning, who Lucian was. He had not forbidden the marriage. He hadn't needed to. He'd simply said, sitting across from her in his office on a Tuesday morning 6 years ago, looking at her with those steady, dark eyes, "You're a grown woman. I'll support whatever you decide. But I'd like you to remember something, Evelyn. You have never needed anyone's name but your own." She'd thought about that sentence 100 times in the years that followed. She thought about it now. The car arrived at Teterboro at 11:47. The small private terminal was quiet at this hour, a handful of ground crew moving in the rain, the sound of a turbine winding down on the far end of the tarmac. Thomas pulled up to the entrance, got out, and held the door for her. She thanked him and meant it. Her father was inside. She saw him through the glass before she pushed through the door. He was standing by the window looking out at the runway, his hands clasped behind his back, wearing a dark overcoat that was still damp at the shoulders. He was 70 years old and looked exactly like himself. Not younger than his age, not older, just precisely, stubbornly himself. The way certain people manage to remain unchanged by time, not through luck but through an iron relationship with their own nature. He turned when he heard the door. He looked at her. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She had made it through the entire evening. The envelope, the hallway, Vivian's voice, Lucian's face, the rain, without crying. She had been dry-eyed and steady through all of it. She managed another 4 seconds. He crossed the room and she walked toward him, and when his arms came around her, she put her face against his shoulder and let 3 months of compressed silence come out all at once. Not loudly, just steadily, the way a pressure valve releases, controlled even in collapse. He held her without speaking. He didn't say it was going to be fine. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Tell me what happened." She pulled back, wiped her face with the back of her hand, an ungraceful gesture she didn't bother hiding. His mother said it in front of everyone, 30 people. She said, "I brought nothing and I was nothing," that he was finally free. She paused. He didn't say anything. He was standing 12 feet away and he didn't say a word. Alexander Carter looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked back out at the runway. "How much of his legitimate operation runs through the Mercer Capital agreements?" he asked. She blinked. The shift in register was so abrupt it took her a second to catch up. 70, maybe 75% of his above-board revenue. The Marchetti deal was supposed to restructure part of that. Was supposed to. The signing was tonight. Her father nodded slowly. Marchetti's lead counsel is Richard Cho. Richard Cho has been a client of Alderman Partners for 9 years. Alderman Partners is— "I know what Alderman Partners is," Evelyn said. Alexander looked at her. There was something in his eyes that wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than anger and more deliberate. "I'm going to make one phone call," he said. "Tonight, that's all." Evelyn looked at him. She understood what one phone call from Alexander Carter meant in certain rooms. She had grown up watching what one phone call could do. Not violently, nothing so crude, just the slow structural withdrawal of confidence. The way a building doesn't fall when one bolt loosens but begins, almost imperceptibly, to lean. "Dad, you're my daughter," he said simply. "She said that to you in front of 30 people." He said nothing. He picked up his coat from the chair beside him. One call. She didn't argue. Because here was the thing about Alexander Carter. The thing that the Blackwood family, in all their research into Evelyn's background over 6 years, had somehow failed to fully grasp. He was not a man who operated through intimidation or force. He was a man who operated through architecture. He had spent 50 years building a structure of relationships and obligations and quietly extended favors so vast and so carefully maintained that when he chose to shift his weight within it, the effects were felt at distances that seemed impossible to connect back to him. He didn't threaten people. He didn't need to. He simply stopped supporting certain things. And when Alexander Carter stopped supporting something, the people around it started making other decisions. Evelyn sat down in one of the terminal chairs while her father stepped away, phone to his ear, voice too low to hear. She set the suitcase beside her. She looked at her own hands in her lap. Still steady, she noticed again, with that same detached interest. Outside, the rain was letting up. She thought about Lucian in that room. The glass he'd never touched. The way he'd looked at her and then away. That 4-second calculation that she would spend years deciding was either cowardice or its own kind of farewell. She thought about Vivian's finger, the way it had pointed at her face, and the particular economy of that gesture, how precisely it had communicated what the woman had thought of her for 6 years. She thought about the photograph in her suitcase. Her father at a table somewhere in the Swiss Alps, 6 people around him, each one of them running something significant, all of them looking at him the way people look at the person in the room who decides how things go. The Blackwoods had looked at that photograph once, 3 years ago. She'd left it out by accident on the dresser, and Vivian had picked it up and asked who it was. "My father," Evelyn had said, "at a conference." Vivian had set it down. She'd looked at it the way a person looks at something that almost registers and then doesn't quite. She'd said, and moved on. That was perhaps the most expensive in the history of the Blackwood family. Her father came back. He put the phone in his coat pocket. "It's done," he said. "What did you do?" "I spoke to someone. He'll speak to 2 others. By morning, the Marchetti signing will be postponed indefinitely. By the end of the week, 3 other agreements that run through the same networks will be under review." He looked at her evenly. "Nothing violent, nothing illegal, just people reassessing their positions." Evelyn absorbed this. "He'll know something happened," she said. "He won't know it was you." "He might suspect." "Let him suspect." She looked at her father for a moment. "I don't want him destroyed, Dad. She stopped, tried to find the words for what she wanted, which was a thing she hadn't let herself think about clearly until this moment. "I just want him to understand what he had." Alexander Carter looked at his daughter with the expression he reserved for moments when she reminded him most of himself. "He will," he said. "Give it time." They left the terminal together just before 1 in the morning. The rain had stopped. The tarmac was wet and black and reflected the lights in long, broken lines that shifted as she walked. She put her suitcase in the car and stood for a moment by the open door, looking up. Clear sky was beginning to show at the edge of the cloud cover, stars behind it, cold and very far away. She got in the car. The city was 40 minutes east, and somewhere in it, Alexander Carter's phone call was already moving through a network that the Blackwood family had no idea existed. By morning, Lucian would begin to feel a shift he couldn't name. By the end of the week, he would start asking questions. And somewhere in the asking, he would begin to understand that the woman he had let stand in the rain while his mother pointed a finger at her face was not the woman he had thought she was. Not even close. The call Lucian received at 6:43 in the morning was not the one that told him something was wrong. It was the third one. The first came from his finance director, Marcus Webb, at 6:09, and it was short and careful and full of the particular brand of measured language that men use when they want to report bad news without being the one who said it out loud. Something about the Marchetti paperwork. A delay. Procedural. Nothing to worry about yet. Lucian had been awake already. He hadn't slept. He'd sat in the study after the guests left, after the house staff finished clearing the remnants of the evening, and he'd sat there with the untouched glass still in his hand, and he'd looked at the empty chair across from him where Evelyn used to sit when she couldn't sleep and needed somewhere quiet to read. She always brought a book. She never turned on extra lights. She'd sit in the one lamp's worth of glow and read, and the house felt different with her in it at 2 in the morning than it felt with her gone. He hadn't let himself think about that until now. He answered Marcus's call standing up, already dressed, already running calculations. Procedural delay with Marchetti. Fine. These things happen. He told Marcus to follow up at 9 and ended the call. The second call came at 6:27. This one was from Donovan Pierce, who ran the legitimate front operations, import businesses, a property management company, 2 restaurants that served as useful locations for meetings that shouldn't be documented. Donovan was not a man who called before 7 in the morning unless something had already broken. 3 of our holding arrangements are under informal review, Donovan said. No preamble. Alderman Partners flagged it this morning. They're citing routine compliance reassessment, but the timing is not routine, Lucian finished. No, it's not. When did this start? Based on the timestamp on the notification, sometime between midnight and 4 a.m. Lucian stood very still. Get me every detail you have, he said. Don't talk to anyone else until I call you back. He ended the call and stayed standing in the study doorway for a moment, looking at nothing, running the geometry of it. Midnight and 4 a.m. The guests had left by 11. The Marchetti deal was supposed to be signed, and it hadn't been. Now Alderman Partners, one of the most quietly influential financial advisory firms connected to his legitimate operations, was making noises about compliance, all of it in the same 8-hour window. The same 8-hour window in which his wife had walked out the front door and gotten into a car heading south toward the city. He didn't complete that thought yet. He didn't allow it to complete. He filed it in the part of his mind where he kept things that needed more information before they could be acted on, and he went to make coffee because his hands needed something to do. The third call came while the coffee was brewing. This one was from a man named Hargrove, who ran a private security and intelligence firm that Lucian kept on quiet retainer for situations that required information before they required action. Hargrove didn't identify himself on the call. He just said 4 words. Teterboro. Last night. Carter. Lucian set down the coffee cup. Which Carter? He said, though he already knew. Alexander Carter. Private flight from Geneva landed 11:38. 1 passenger, car met the plane. The silence on Lucian's end lasted 6 seconds. Who was in the car? He said. Hargrove paused. Your wife, Mr. Blackwood. Former wife. She arrived at the terminal at approximately 11:47. Lucian had a very specific skill that had kept him alive and operational for 15 years in a world where people with less control than him were dead or imprisoned. The skill was this. He did not react to information until he had processed it. He did not allow his face or his voice or his body to communicate anything to anyone until he had decided what he wanted communicated. He used that skill now. Thank you, he said. Keep monitoring. He ended the call. He poured the coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table, but Not the study, not the formal dining room, just the kitchen table where he had had 1,000 ordinary mornings. And he sat with the coffee in both hands, and he allowed himself, for 30 seconds, to feel the full weight of what was assembling itself in his mind. Alexander Carter. He knew the name. Everyone in his world knew the name. In the way you know the name of certain geographic features, mountain ranges, major rivers, things that form the underlying structure of a landscape you move through without always thinking about. Alexander Carter was not a criminal. He was something harder to define and therefore harder to manage. A financier of extraordinary reach. A man with relationships in every significant room in America and several significant rooms in Europe, Asia, and parts of the world that didn't appear on the standard maps of power. He was, by every credible account, one of the 5 or 6 people in the country whose quiet endorsement or quiet withdrawal could materially alter the financial architecture of large, established operations. He was also, apparently, Evelyn's father. Lucian put the coffee down. He got up and went to the study and stood in front of the bookshelf on the east wall. Second shelf from the bottom, behind a set of bound ledgers that nobody opened because they looked like nothing. This was where he kept the actual research files on people. Physical copies, not digital. He pulled the section for the letter C. There was a file on Evelyn. He'd had it assembled before the marriage, standard practice. He opened it now, 6 years too late, and read it the way he should have read it the first time. Not looking for threats, but looking for the complete picture. It was thin. That had seemed fine at the time. She had a clean background, no criminal connections, a modest work history in financial consulting, no significant family wealth on record. Her mother had died when she was 9. Father listed as A. Carter, self-employed, no further detail available. He stared at that line. A. Carter, self-employed. He had accepted that and moved on. He had not pushed for more because she had not seemed important enough to push for more on. She was a woman he'd met at a function who was intelligent and composed and didn't want anything from him that he could identify, which in his experience was either extremely rare or extremely dangerous, and he'd chosen to interpret it as rare. He closed the file. He stood there a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Vivian answered on the second ring, which meant she was already awake and already had her phone nearby, which meant she already knew something was wrong even if she didn't know what. "Lucian," she said, "I need you to come downstairs." "It's not yet 7. "I know what time it is. Come downstairs." She arrived in the kitchen 12 minutes later, dressed with her usual precision, which he noted with the part of his mind that tracked such things. She hadn't dressed in a hurry. She'd dressed the way she always dressed. This irritated him more than he expected. She saw his face when she came in and her posture adjusted slightly, a subtle defensive reorganization he'd watched her perform his entire life. "What is it?" she said. Not a question. "Sit down." "I prefer to, Mother." His voice was level, not loud, just level in a specific way that ended sentences. "Sit down." She sat. He put his phone on the table between them, screen up, with Hargrove's call still showing in the recent list. Then he sat down across from her. "Tell me what you know about Alexander Carter," he said. Something moved behind her eyes. "The financier. I've heard the name." "You've done more than hear the name. You met him. I need to know when and in what context." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands on the table were perfectly still, which with Vivian meant the opposite of what it looked like. "Years ago," she said carefully. "A private gathering in Connecticut. He was present. We were introduced briefly." "What did you understand about him at the time?" "That he was very wealthy, that he had considerable influence in certain financial circles, that he was—" She paused. "Private, difficult to read." "And you knew his daughter was named Evelyn." The stillness in her hands broke. Not much. A small shift, the fingers tightening almost imperceptibly against the table surface, but he saw it. "I had no reason to believe." "Did you know?" he said. The kitchen was very quiet. Vivian looked at her son across the table. He watched her work through the calculation. How much he already knew, how much she could still manage, which version of the truth was safest. "I suspected," she said finally. "The last name was the same. But Carter is not an uncommon name, and she never—" "You suspected." He let the words sit, and you chose not to investigate further. I chose not to dignify a suspicion that seemed, you stood in that room last night, Lucian said, in front of 30 people, and you told her she was nothing, that she brought nothing, that I was free of her. His voice hadn't changed in pitch or volume. That was the thing about it. It hadn't changed at all. And you may have done that already knowing who her father was. I didn't know. You suspected. He stood up. There's a difference between didn't know and didn't bother to find out, and I need you to sit here and understand that difference very clearly right now. He walked to the window. The valley was coming into gray morning light below, fog on the lower slopes, the river a flat dark line in the distance. He'd looked at this view for 20 years, and he'd never once thought about how it would look from the other side of the gate. Behind him, he heard Vivian's chair shift. Lucian, even if she is Alexander Carter's daughter, that doesn't change what happened between you and her. The marriage wasn't working. You agreed it wasn't. I agreed it needed to end, he said. I did not agree to what you did last night. I handled it. You humiliated her. He turned around. In front of the Marchetti associates, in front of people who now know exactly what this family thinks of the woman who is Alexander Carter's daughter. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what position you've put us in? Vivian straightened. Something old and inflexible came into her face, something that had been her armor his entire life, and that he had spent years both depending on and resenting. I was protecting this family. From what? From a woman who never once worked against us? Who sat in this house for 6 years and helped us and asked for nothing, and you repaid her by pointing your finger in her face while 30 people watched? His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. He didn't acknowledge it. Vivian saw it. Her expression shifted. You're upset, she said, in a different tone, softer. The mother voice, which she deployed selectively, and which had always found a way under his armor no matter how many years and how many things he'd seen. I'm trying to understand how much damage was done, he said. His voice was flat again. We don't know that any damage. The Marchetti signing was postponed this morning. Alderman Partners is reviewing 3 of our holding arrangements. These things happened in the 8 hours after Evelyn got in a car and drove to meet her father at Teterboro. He looked at his mother. The sequence isn't a coincidence. The room was quiet. Vivian's hands had gone still again. This time he didn't look at them. I see, she said. I need to know everything you know about what you may have known before last night, he said. Not what you're comfortable telling me. Everything. Because if I'm going to address this, I need the complete picture of what happened and what I'm actually dealing with. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, the gathering in Connecticut was in 2012. Alexander Carter attended with his daughter. She was perhaps 23, 24. I remember her because she was unusually composed for her age. She spoke very little, but when she did, the men around her listened. She paused. I didn't connect it to Evelyn immediately because by the time I met you, by the time you introduced her, 3 years had passed and I saw what I expected to see. A young woman who was suitable, not remarkable. But you looked again at some point. The last name, Vivian said quietly. Approximately 2 years into the marriage, I asked someone to look into it quietly. And? The connection was plausible, not confirmed. The Carter family kept their private relationships extremely private. I couldn't verify it without making inquiries that would have drawn attention. So you knew for 4 years, Lucian said. Approximately. She didn't answer. And last night you chose to, what, get ahead of it? Remove her before someone else figured it out and it became a conversation you had no control over. Lucian, I'm not asking because I want an argument, he said. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm holding. She was quiet for a moment, then, I thought it was managed. He almost laughed. He stopped himself. Go upstairs, he said. I need to make calls. Lucian, if you reach out to her now, it will look, go upstairs, mother. She went. He stood in the kitchen for a long time after she left. The coffee was cold. The morning light was coming in harder now, burning off the fog over the valley, and the estate looked very large and very quiet around him. He picked up his phone and stared at Evelyn's number in his contacts. He put the phone back down. He called Marcus Webb instead. The Marchetti postponement, he said when Marcus answered. I need you to find out exactly who initiated it. Not the reason they're giving, the actual origin point. Trace it as far back as it goes, and don't tell anyone else you're doing it. I'll need a few hours, Marcus said. You have 2. He ended the call. Then he called Donovan Pierce back. The Alderman review, he said. Same thing. I want the origin point, and I want to know if any other relationships in our legitimate network are showing unusual activity in the last 12 hours. Donovan was quiet for a moment. How wide do you want me to cast? Wide enough to see the shape of it. He ended that call too. Then he sat down again and looked at the kitchen table. There was a small mark on the wood near the far edge. A burn mark from years ago, before he'd owned the house, left there by someone he'd never know. He'd looked at it hundreds of times without thinking about it. He thought about Evelyn now. The way she used to sit across this table in the mornings when the staff wasn't yet in. No performance, none of the particular composure she maintained when there were others around. Just herself, slightly rumpled, reading something on her phone, or staring at nothing, one hand wrapped around a mug. She had never looked impressive in those moments. She had looked real, which was different and rarer. He thought about the night 18 months ago when a deal with the Restrepo family in Miami had gone sideways in a way that threatened to expose 3 years of careful positioning. He'd been on the phone for 6 hours, pacing this kitchen, and around 2 in the morning, Evelyn had come down and sat across from him and listened while he thought out loud, not offering solutions, just listening, the kind of listening that organizes a person's thinking without them realizing it's happening. And somewhere in that listening, he'd found the angle he'd missed, the one that resolved it cleanly. He hadn't told her that's what happened. He'd thought it was him, finding the answer, his mind, his experience, his skill. He understood now that he'd had a very particular kind of help, that he hadn't recognized as help, because it came without announcement. Marcus called back at 8:51, which was faster than the 2 hours Lucian had given him, and that alone told Lucian how significant what Marcus had found was. The Marchetti postponement originated with Richard Cho, their lead counsel, Marcus said. Cho reached out to them at 6 this morning. He cited a conversation last night with a senior partner at Alderman, who advised a pause pending a review of the Blackwood Network's current liability exposure. Lucian kept his voice even. And the Alderman review? Initiated internally, about 12:45 this morning. The partner who flagged it is on the advisory board of a foundation. Marcus paused. The foundation's primary funder is listed as the Carter Family Trust. The kitchen was very quiet. Say that again, Lucian said. The Carter Family Trust, Marcus said. Alexander Carter's primary philanthropic vehicle also functions as a network anchor for several of the advisory relationships that intersect with our legitimate operations. I didn't know this before this morning. I should have. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, Lucian said. Just keep going. If Carter chose to shift his position, even informally, even just by placing a few calls to people in his orbit, the downstream effects on our network would be, Marcus stopped. Significant. How significant? Another pause. It would take time to develop fully, but if the Marchetti deal doesn't close, and if Alderman withdraws their advisory relationships, and if others in the same network follow, he stopped again. We'd be looking at a restructuring of everything above the line, Mr. Blackwood. Everything that makes this operation look legitimate to the outside world. Lucian set his phone face down on the table and stared at the burn mark in the wood. One phone call. Whatever Alexander Carter had done, however he'd done it, it had been one night, one phone call, or maybe 2, in the dark hours while the rain cleared and his daughter rode south toward the city. That was the architecture. That was what had been sitting next to him for 6 years, reading in the lamplight at 2 in the morning, keeping its own counsel, never asking to be seen. And his mother had pointed a finger at it in front of 30 people. He picked up the phone. He didn't call Evelyn. He wasn't ready for that, and he was honest enough with himself to know it. He called the one person in his organization who had spent years quietly building the same kind of lateral relationships that Evelyn had once helped him understand. The call went to voicemail. He hung up. He tried another number, voicemail again. He sat there. He tried a third. This one picked up, but the tone of the voice on the other end was already careful, already managed, already the tone of someone who has heard something and hasn't decided yet how to position himself relative to it. That tone told Lucian everything. The word was already moving through the network. Faster than he'd expected, which meant the network was already paying closer attention than he'd realized. People were already recalibrating, already asking each other quietly, Did you know who she was? Did anyone know? The answer was no. Nobody had known, because Evelyn had never told anyone. She had come into his world with her real name worn openly and her real weight carried privately, and she had sat beside him through 6 years of deals and threats and midnight crises, and she had never once used what she actually had. She hadn't needed to. She'd just been there, and now she wasn't. His phone buzzed. A message from Donovan. 4 other firms in their financial network had flagged unusual communications in the last hour. Not withdrawals yet, not formal reviews, just quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a decision already made. Lucian read the message twice. He put the phone down. He looked at the kitchen, at the table, at the burn mark in the wood, at the cold coffee, at the chair across from him that was empty the way rooms are empty after something permanent has left them. He had spent 15 years building an empire on the principle that power was a thing you took and held through force of will and sufficient fear. He had believed that utterly. He still believed most of it, but sitting in his kitchen on a gray October morning with his legitimate world quietly beginning to lean, he understood something for the first time with a completeness that felt like being hit. There was a category of power he had never accounted for, the kind that didn't announce itself, the kind that sat across from you in the lamplight, listening and never once asked you to know its name. And he had let it walk out his front door in the rain with one suitcase, while his mother pointed a finger and 30 people watched, and he looked at the floor. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it. Mr. Blackwood? The voice was professional, neutral, the kind of voice that exists in certain corridors of institutional finance. My name is Reston. I'm calling on behalf of a group of investors who have historically maintained positions adjacent to your portfolio. We'd like to request a meeting. About what? Lucian said. About the structural resilience of your current network, Reston said, given certain developments. Given certain developments. Lucian looked out the kitchen window at the estate grounds, at the iron gate at the end of the long drive, at the road beyond it disappearing into the trees. I'll have my people contact yours, he said, first thing next week. We were hoping for something more immediate, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps Thursday. Thursday was 3 days away. Thursday, Lucian said. He ended the call. He sat for a moment without moving. Then he picked up the phone and found Evelyn's number in his contacts and stared at it for a long time. He didn't call. He put the phone in his pocket and stood up and walked to the window and looked at the gate again. Somewhere on the other side of it, in a city 40 miles south, a woman who had never needed his name was having breakfast with her father, and the walls of everything Lucian had built were beginning quietly and without drama to lean. Thursday came in cold and flat, the kind of morning that offered nothing. No particular light, no weather worth describing, just gray pressing down on gray. Lucian had not slept properly in 3 days. He knew what that did to a person. He'd operated sleep-deprived before, in situations that were objectively more dangerous than this one, and he'd learned to account for it, to slow his reactions slightly, to double-check his own reasoning, to assume that whatever felt certain at 2 in the morning would look different at 7. He applied those compensations now, methodically, the way you apply pressure to a wound. It wasn't enough, because the problem wasn't fatigue. The problem was that for 3 days his mind had kept returning, against his will and without invitation, to the same sequence. Evelyn at the top of the stairs. Evelyn coming down. The 4 seconds he'd held her eyes and then looked away. He kept trying to examine that 4 seconds like a mechanic examines a component that failed, looking for the exact point of the break, the specific mechanism of the malfunction. He couldn't find it. It had been instinct, some cold, self-protective reflex that had fired before he'd consciously decided anything. He was beginning to understand that some instincts are not protective. They just feel like it in the moment. The meeting with Reston and the investor group was scheduled for 10 a.m. at a downtown location. Not Blackwood territory, neutral ground, which Lucian had accepted without negotiating because the accepting itself sent a message he'd calculated to be useful. He arrived 12 minutes early. This was deliberate. He was already in the room when they came in, which re-established a specific kind of authority that the request for the meeting had temporarily displaced. There were 4 of them. Reston, who was approximately 50 and had the face of someone who had been delivering bad news professionally for 2 decades. Two others whose names Lucian had been given, but whom he'd already assessed as secondary, present for witness or consensus purposes. And a fourth, a woman he hadn't expected, sitting at the far end of the table, already there when he'd arrived. Her name was Diane Falk. She ran the institutional investment arm of a firm called Verity Group. Verity Group, he had learned in the last 72 hours of rapid education, was one of three primary vehicles through which Alexander Carter's financial network maintained positions in legitimate enterprises throughout the Northeastern Corridor. He hadn't known that before this week. He should have. He was beginning to compile a list of things he should have known. "Mr. Blackwood," Reston said, settling into his chair with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this. "Thank you for making time." "Of course," Lucian said. He didn't look at Diane Falk directly. He was aware of her in the peripheral way you're aware of the thing in the room that actually matters while you engage with the things around it. "I'll be straightforward," Reston said, which was what people said when they were going to be approximately straightforward, but had already decided what they were going to omit. "Several of our stakeholder groups have raised concerns in the last week about the stability of their positions relative to your operation." "What kind of concerns?" Lucian said. "Structural ones. The Marchetti Agreement was a significant piece of the forward positioning for this quarter. Its postponement creates a gap. The Alderman Review compounds that gap." Reston set a folder on the table but didn't open it. "There's also been some conversation about the organizational dynamics within the Blackwood network, leadership continuity, decision-making coherence." "I've been leading this organization for 15 years, Lucian said. "Yes," Reston said. "The concern isn't historical, it's perspective." Diane Falk shifted in her chair. A small movement. Lucian tracked it. "Ms. Falk," he said, "you've been quiet." She looked at him without any particular expression, the kind of neutral that is itself a form of commentary. "I'm here to listen, Mr. Blackwood." "You're here from Verity Group," he said, "which means you're here because of Alexander Carter." Nobody at the table moved. "Verity Group operates independently of any single—" Reston began. "I'd like to hear from Ms. Falk," Lucian said. Quietly. Just quiet. Diane Falk looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "The Carter family network has historically provided indirect stability to several relationships that intersect with your operation. If that stability shifts, the downstream effects are real, and they're not reversible on a short timeline." "Is it shifting?" Lucian said. "It has shifted," she said. "The question this meeting is trying to answer is whether there's a stabilization path. And what would stabilization look like?" She was quiet for a moment. "That's above my authority to specify." He understood what that meant. It meant the answer existed, but the person who held it wasn't in this room. The person who held it was somewhere in Manhattan, in a building with his name on it, having already decided what he was or wasn't willing to accept. He sat back. He looked at the folder Reston had placed on the table but not opened. "Open it," he said. Reston opened it. Inside was a summary. 4 pages, dense, the kind of document that takes longer to read than its page count suggests. Lucian read all 4 pages without expression, turning each page at roughly the speed of someone who is comprehending rather than skimming. He set it down. The summary outlined, in the careful language of institutional finance, the potential cascading effects on his legitimate holdings if the current trajectory continued. It was thorough. It was accurate. It used neutral language that was more devastating for being neutral. The way a doctor's measured voice in a certain kind of room is worse than if they just said the thing directly. "You've done a thorough job of telling me what I'm losing," Lucian said. "None of you have told me what I can do about it." Reston exchanged a glance with Diane Falk. The glance was the kind that had a whole conversation inside it, one that had clearly already happened before this meeting. "There are people," Reston said carefully, "who believe that a direct conversation might be productive." "With Carter. With the relevant parties." Lucian looked at him. "Say what you mean." Reston inhaled. "With Evelyn Carter Blackwood. If there were some indication that the personal situation had been addressed, that the circumstances of the separation had been reconsidered, That would carry significant weight with the parties whose confidence is currently. You want me to go to my ex-wife, Lucian said. We want you to consider what a meaningful conversation might accomplish. He looked at them, all four of them, in turn. He took his time. No, he said. The room shifted. Mr. Blackwood, not because I won't consider it, he said, because what you're describing isn't a conversation. You're describing a negotiation where my ex-wife is the currency and her father is the counterparty, and you're sitting here as intermediaries. That's not a conversation. Diane Falk said, then what would you call it? A demand wearing the clothes of a suggestion, he said. I've seen that before. I know how to dress it too. He stood up, picked up his coat. I'll have Marcus reach out to your offices about the specific structural concerns, he said. The Marchetti deal will be resolved through legitimate channels. The Alderman review will be addressed on its merits. He looked at Reston. If there's anything else, you know how to reach me. He walked out. He made it to the elevator before his jaw unlocked. He hadn't realized how tight he'd been holding it. He stood in the elevator with his hands in his coat pockets and felt his pulse in his throat, which was not something he was accustomed to feeling, and he breathed through it methodically until it slowed. The lobby. The street. The car. He got in the back seat. Thomas. It wasn't his Thomas. It was the Blackwood driver, a man named Garrett who had been with the family for 8 years, pulled into traffic without being told where to go yet, which was the appropriate move. Lucian looked out the window. He had not lied in the meeting. That was important to him. He had not said, I will not go to Evelyn. He had said that what they were proposing was not the right framework. Those were different things, and the distinction mattered, though he was still working out exactly how much and in what direction it mattered. His phone buzzed. Marcus. He answered. Tell me, he said. 2 more firms, Marcus said. One in Boston, one in D.C. Both have sent informal inquiries about the status of their arrangements, and... He paused. Lucian, the Fenwick property. The Fenwick property was a commercial real estate holding in Midtown Manhattan. It was one of the cleaner assets in the portfolio, legitimately acquired, legitimately operated. It was also the collateral on a bridge loan that funded 3 other acquisitions in the past 18 months. What about it? Lucian said. His voice was still even. The lender is reviewing the loan covenants. They're citing market uncertainty. If they call the note, they won't call the note. Lucian. Marcus's voice was careful in a way it almost never was. The lender's board has 2 members who are on the advisory council of a Carter-affiliated foundation. The silence in the car was total. When did you find that out? Lucian said. An hour ago. He ended the call. He looked at the back of Garrett's head. Outside, Manhattan moved past the windows, indifferent. He called Vivian. She answered immediately. I need you to tell me something, he said. And I need you to tell me all of it this time. Lucian, when you confirmed the connection between Evelyn and Alexander Carter, he said. 2 years into the marriage, you said. When you confirmed it, what did you do with that information? A pause. I kept it, she said. Did you tell anyone? Another pause, longer. Mother. There was a conversation, she said, with Dominic Rial. He went very still. Dominic Riale was the closest thing the Blackwood organization had to a consigliere, a man who operated in the intersection between the legitimate and the criminal infrastructure, who had been his father's advisor first and his after that. Riale was 63 years old and had a mind like a filing system, and had always made Lucian slightly uneasy in a way he'd never been able to fully articulate. What kind of conversation? Lucian said. I told him what I'd found. About the Carter connection. I thought... She stopped. I thought he should know, that it might be relevant to how we managed certain relationships. Did he tell anyone else? The pause this time was the longest yet. I don't know, Vivian said. Possibly. He has his own... Lucian, I thought it was handled. He took the phone away from his ear. He looked at it for a moment. He put it back. Stop talking to anyone about this, he said. Don't call Rial, don't call anyone. Just stop. He ended the call. Rial. He sat with that for a moment, working through what it meant, what it could mean, what the range of possible meanings was. Dominic Rial had been in the room last night. He had been in the room standing near the bar when Vivian delivered her speech to Evelyn. He had watched it happen. He had watched Lucian watch it happen, and he had not said anything before, during, or after, which was interesting. "Garrett," he said, "take me to the Aldwych." The Aldwych was a private club in Midtown, not the kind with a waiting list or a famous chef, the kind with heavy curtains and a small membership roster and a bar that opened at 11 a.m., because most of its members needed it to. It was where Dominic Rial spent his Thursday mornings. Riale was at his usual table when Lucian arrived, corner seat, facing the room, a pot of coffee, and a newspaper that Lucian was reasonably sure existed as a prop. He looked up when Lucian came in. His face did not change. That was the thing that told Lucian he was in the right place. He sat down across from Rial without being invited. The waiter started toward them. Lucian shook his head without looking at him, and the waiter changed direction. "Lucian," Riale said, "you look tired." "Tell me about the conversation you had with my mother 2 years ago," Lucian said. "The one about Evelyn's family." Riale set down the newspaper. He picked up his coffee cup, took a drink, set it down with an unhurried precision that was itself an answer of a kind. "She told you," he said. "She told me she told you. I'm asking what you did with it." Riale looked at him with the expression of someone sorting through a large collection of available truths to find the one that served best. Lucian had seen that expression his entire life on that face. He had never fully clocked what it meant until this moment. "I made some inquiries," Riale said. "Into what?" "Into the nature of the Carter network, into what it would mean for our operation if the connection became known, if it became complicated." "And what did you conclude?" "That it was a risk worth managing." "How?" Lucian said. "Specifically, how?" Riale set down the coffee cup again. He looked at Lucian directly. "I identified certain individuals within the Carter-adjacent network who had reason to be cautious about Alexander Carter's broader influence, people who might benefit from certain information being available to them." Lucian felt something drop in his chest. "What information?" he said. "Nothing that wasn't already out there in some form. The nature of Alexander Carter's network, the extent of his reach, the fact that his daughter had placed herself within your operation." "You told people outside this organization that my wife was Alexander Carter's daughter," Lucian said. "Not in those explicit, answer the question." Riale looked at him. "Yes." The word landed like something heavy and irreversible. "Who?" Lucian said. "People who had their own interests in knowing." "Who?" Riale exhaled. "Vincent, Harpe, the Castellano brothers, and—" He stopped. "Keep going." "A man named Beaumont. He runs a positioning operation out of New Orleans. He has connections to several East Coast families that have been watching your expansion with interest." Lucian looked at Dominic Rial across a table they had sat at dozens of times over 15 years. He looked at the face of a man his father had trusted, and that he had inherited, and that he had never looked at closely enough, because some things you inherit, you don't examine, you just use. "You told competing organizations," Lucian said, "that my wife was the daughter of one of the most connected financiers in the country. You gave them that information, without telling me. I was managing a risk." "You were building leverage," Lucian said. His voice was extremely quiet. "For yourself. Something you could use if you ever needed it, if I ever became inconvenient." Riale said nothing. "How long have you been doing that?" Lucian said. "Building those kinds of reserves." Riale picked up his coffee cup again. His hands were steady. That was what Lucian noticed. The steadiness, the absence of remorse or fear. Just that same filing system calm that had always felt like loyalty and was now revealing itself as something else. "A man in my position has to think about his own continuity," Riale said. "You've been in my organization for 15 years. "Yes. And in that time." "I've protected my interests," Riale said simply. "The same as you." Lucian looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked around the room. Dark wood, heavy curtains, 3 other tables occupied by men who were either genuinely reading or performing it. A quiet room. A room that had absorbed 1,000 careful conversations. He looked back at Rial. "You knew Vivian was going to move against Evelyn last week," he said. It wasn't a question, but Riale's lack of response confirmed it. You knew, and you didn't tell me. It wasn't. You knew, Lucien said again, flat, certain. Rial set down the cup. I thought the separation was strategically sound, he said, regardless of who her father was. Your connection to Evelyn was a variable I couldn't fully account for. She operated too independently. She knew too much about the architecture of certain arrangements without being fully inside the organization. That's an exposure. She was my wife. She was an unknown quantity wearing a familiar face, Riale said. I made a judgment. Lucien looked at him. He was aware of his own breathing, aware of his hands on the table, flat, not fisted, very still. He was aware of the distance between what he wanted to do in this moment and what he was going to do, and the gap between those two things was wide enough that he could feel it physically, like a door held against pressure. You're going to leave this organization, Lucien said. Riale blinked. For the first time, something moved behind his expression. Lucien, not today, not publicly. You'll identify a succession arrangement over the next 30 days, and you'll execute it cleanly, and you'll represent to everyone in and around this organization that it is a voluntary retirement. He paused. And in exchange for that, I'll not pursue the question of what else you've traded and to whom. Rial looked at him. That's it? He said. There was something in his voice, not relief, more like recalibration. That's the offer, Lucien said. 30 days. He stood up. He put on his coat. He looked down at Rial one more time. My father trusted you, he said. I want you to know that I understand what that means, and that you should think about it. He walked out. On the sidewalk, the cold hit him. He stood there for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, watching the traffic pass. The lunch crowd was beginning, people moving in both directions with the particular urgency of Manhattan midday. He felt hollowed out. That was the closest word he had for it. Not angry anymore. Not afraid. Just scoured. Like something that had been emptied by a process he'd had no say in. Riale had been building a file on him. For years, probably. Using information that Vivian had provided, and information Rial had gathered himself, and the particular leverage that came from knowing a secret that someone else didn't know you knew. He had been inside the organization and outside it simultaneously, maintaining a private position that was itself a kind of crime, the specific crime of people who smile at the table while keeping one foot out the door. And Evelyn had sat inside this organization for 6 years, knowing things she shouldn't have had access to from the outside, never using any of it. Not once. Not even now. She hadn't gone to his enemies. She hadn't exposed him. She had simply gone home. The contrast between those two things was so complete that Lucien stood on the sidewalk for a full 30 seconds before he could make himself move. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. He answered. The Fenwick lender called the note, Marcus said. His voice had a texture to it that Lucien had never heard before. Not panic. Marcus was too controlled for panic, but something adjacent. The sound of a man watching a structure fail. They served formal notice an hour ago. We have 60 days to satisfy the balance or the collateral transfers. The Fenwick collateral, which funded 3 acquisitions, which were themselves leveraged against. I know what it means, Lucien said. Lucien. Marcus paused. The Riale situation. I've been running numbers on our internal exposure if some of what he shared externally is active. If those conversations he had with the competing families have produced anything, what are you saying? I'm saying there may be people watching us right now, Marcus said carefully, who know considerably more about our structure than they should, who've been waiting for exactly this kind of destabilization to make a move. The information Riale distributed, it's not just the Carter connection. If he was building reserves across the board, there's no way to know what else he shared and with whom. The street, the traffic, the people moving in both directions. How long have we had, Lucien said, before this becomes irreversible? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. I've never seen the variables line up like this. Lucien stood on the sidewalk with the phone at his ear and felt the particular vertigo of a man who has spent 15 years building an architecture of control and is now watching it reveal, piece by piece, that it was built on assumptions that were wrong. He had assumed Vivian was protecting the family. She had been protecting her position within it. He had assumed Reale was loyal. He had been loyal to himself, which is not the same thing. He had assumed Evelyn was contained, limited, domestic, safely peripheral to the machinery of his real life. She had been the thing holding the machinery together in ways he hadn't bothered to look for, because he hadn't thought she was worth looking at closely. Every assumption wrong. Not catastrophically wrong all at once. Each one wrong in a quiet, incremental way that had accumulated over years until the accumulation hit a tipping point on a rainy night when a woman picked up a suitcase and walked out a front door. He got back in the car. "Carter Tower," he told Garrett. Garrett didn't respond for a moment. Then he said, "Sir?" "Carter Tower," Lucian said again. "In Midtown." He sat in the back seat as the car pulled into traffic and watched Manhattan pass and felt, for the first time in 15 years of running a criminal empire, the specific sensation of being someone who is out of moves and knows it. He was not going there to apologize. He wasn't sure he was capable of an apology that would be worth anything to anyone, including himself. He was going because Reale had been right about one thing. Evelyn Carter had always been an unknown quantity. He just had the nature of the unknown exactly backwards. He'd thought she was an unknown risk. She was an unknown resource, the only one he'd ever had that he had not cataloged, measured, and used. The car crossed into Midtown. The tower appeared ahead, steel and glass, 40 floors of it, Alexander Carter's name nowhere visible on the exterior because men with that kind of weight don't need their name on things. Lucian looked up at it through the window. He was about to walk into a building that did not belong to him, to ask for a conversation he had no right to request, with a woman who owed him nothing and knew it, while the organization he had spent his life building was quietly coming apart at the seams in ways he could not stop from the outside. He had one option left, and it was standing somewhere above him in a building she didn't need him to walk into, living a life she was managing without any help from him at all, and the only honest question left was whether she would agree to look at him long enough to let him say what needed saying before she turned and walked back into the elevator. The car stopped. Garrett opened the door. Lucian Blackwood, who had not been afraid of anything in 15 years, sat in the back seat for 3 seconds longer than he needed to. Then he got out. The lobby of Carter Tower was the kind of space that had been designed to make a specific point without saying anything out loud. No marble, no gold fixtures, no ostentatious signals of wealth, just clean lines, dark stone, glass that went all the way to a ceiling 4 stories up, and a quality of silence that was not empty but controlled. The silence of a building where everything non-essential had been removed because the people inside it didn't need to be impressed and had no interest in impressing anyone else. Lucian walked through the revolving door and felt the shift in air pressure. Warmer inside. Quieter. 2 security personnel at a desk to the left, both in plain clothes that were too well fitted to be accidental, both watching him with the particular attention of people who had been told to expect him or had assessed him in the 3 seconds between the door and the desk and made a decision. He walked to the desk. "Lucian Blackwood," he said. "I'm here to see Evelyn Carter." The man on the left, 30s, square-jawed, the kind of stillness that comes from training rather than disposition, looked at him without any readable expression. "Is Ms. Carter expecting you?" "No?" A pause. The 2 men exchanged nothing visible. Then the one on the left picked up a phone, turned slightly away, spoke quietly for approximately 15 seconds, listened, and set the phone down. "Someone will be down shortly," he said. "If you'd like to wait." He gestured toward a seating area to the right. Lucian didn't sit. He stood near the window and looked out at the street and felt his pulse in his wrists, which was not a sensation he was comfortable with, and which he could not make stop through willpower alone, which told him something about the state he was actually in versus the state he was presenting. He waited 8 minutes. The elevator opened and a woman came out whom he didn't recognize, 40s, dark suit, the walk of someone who delivers messages and has learned to remain neutral about their content. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "Ms. Carter will see you, 42nd floor." He followed her into the elevator. The doors closed. He watched the numbers rise and kept his breathing even and thought about nothing in particular, which was a technique he'd used before operations that required a clear head, and it worked approximately as well now as it ever had, which was to say imperfectly, but better than the alternative. The 42nd floor opened into a reception area that had a single person at a desk and two closed doors beyond it. The woman who'd brought him up exchanged a word with the receptionist and then withdrew back into the elevator without further ceremony. The door on the right opened. Evelyn stood in the doorway. She was dressed simply. Dark trousers, a cream-colored top, her hair pulled back without fuss. She looked like herself, which was the thing that hit him hardest, because he had spent 3 days constructing some version of her in his mind that would be easier to face, more formal, more distant, armored in some way that would give him something to push against. And instead, she just looked like Evelyn. The same face he had looked at for 6 years across breakfast tables, and in the dark at 2 in the morning, and across 30 feet of a crowded room while his mother's finger pointed at her. "Lucian?" she said. No surprise, no warmth, just his name, stated, acknowledged. "I know I don't have the right to be here," he said. "No," she agreed. "You don't. Come in anyway." He followed her into the office. It was large and had windows on 2 sides, the city below them in every direction, and it was clearly her space, not borrowed, not assigned. There were books on the shelves that he recognized from the nightstand in the house they'd shared, and a coffee cup on the desk that looked like it had been there for hours, and a jacket thrown over the back of a chair with the carelessness of someone who had been working since early and had stopped caring about surfaces. She sat behind the desk. She did not invite him to sit, but there was a chair across from her, and he took it because standing felt like a different kind of performance. She looked at him across the desk, waiting. "Reale," he said. "Dominic Reale. Do you know that name?" Something moved in her eyes, quick, barely visible, like a reaction she'd caught and contained before it finished forming. "I know who he is." "Did you know what he was doing?" She looked at him steadily. "I knew there was someone inside the organization who was building a parallel position. I didn't have a name until 2 years ago." He heard that, processed it. 2 years ago. "I noticed patterns," she said, "in conversations, in the way certain information moved through the network in ways that didn't match the direction you'd set. I didn't tell you because—" She stopped. "Because every time I tried to bring operational concerns to you, you thanked me politely and didn't act on them," she said. Not angry, factual. The same level, factual tone that was apparently genetic in some way because he'd heard it in her father's voice on the phone. "I mentioned Reale's name to you once, obliquely, 2 years ago, March, after the Solis deal." He went through his memory. March. The Solis deal. There had been a dinner, he remembered that, and she had said something across the table about the information architecture of the organization, and he had told her it was fine, that he had it handled, that she didn't need to worry about that side of things. "I remember," he said. "Good," she said. They sat with that for a moment. "He shared your identity with competing organizations," Lucian said. "The Carter connection. He's been using it as leverage or as insurance, or both. There are people who know more about the structure of my operation than they should, and Reale is the source." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "How?" "Because I've been watching it," she said simply. "Because I grew up in a family where understanding how information moves is considered basic competence, and because 6 years in your organization taught me the specific topology of yours, and because once I left the house last week, I had time to actually look at what I'd been watching without having to manage the emotional weight of being inside it." He looked at her for a long moment. "Who else knows?" "My father knows some of it, not all. I've kept the specifics limited because the specifics are yours and I wasn't sure—" She paused. "I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with them. And now—" She looked at him across the desk. Her expression was not hostile. It was careful, in the way that someone is careful with something they've already decided is breakable. "What do you want, Lucian?" she said. "Specifically, not in general. What did you come here to ask?" He had prepared for this. On the drive over, he'd gone through every version of this conversation, every possible opening, every way of framing what he needed that didn't sound like either a transaction or a plea, because he didn't have the right to plead, and he wasn't capable of transacting with her anymore. He'd prepared all of it, and now he sat across from her and said, "I don't know." She blinked. "I know what the operational problem is," he said. "I know what I need to stabilize it. I know that you have information I don't have, and your father has influence I can't replicate, and that without some version of those two things, the legitimate structure of my operation is going to come apart in a way I may not be able to rebuild. He looked at her. I know all of that. But I didn't come here about that. Then why did you come? Because I looked away, he said. In that room. You looked at me and I looked away and I've been... He stopped. His hands were on his knees and he looked at them for a moment. I've been trying to understand what happened in that 4 seconds, and I can't find a justification for it. I can find reasons. I can construct a sequence of cowardice that explains the mechanism. But I can't find anything that makes it something other than what it was. Evelyn was very still. Which was what? She said. Her voice was quieter now. I let her do it, he said, to protect myself from a conversation I didn't want to have, about what you actually were to me, what you'd been, because acknowledging that would have meant acknowledging everything I hadn't done, and it was easier to look at the floor. He paused. That's all it was. There's no version of it that's better than that. The office was quiet. Outside the windows, Manhattan went on being Manhattan, 42 floors below, indifferent. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. He couldn't read her, and he didn't try. He just sat there and let her look and said nothing. Then her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it. Something changed in her face. Not much, a small tightening around the eyes. Excuse me, she said. She picked up the phone, read something, set it down, picked it up again and typed something quickly. Set it down. What is it? He said. She looked at him. The careful expression had been replaced by something more alert. Beaumont, she said. He went cold. The man from New Orleans. He's called a meeting, she said. Today. This afternoon. He's reached out to 3 of the East Coast families and he's framing it as a coordination discussion about... She glanced at the phone again. About the current instability in the Blackwood network and opportunities for regional restructuring. Lucian was on his feet. He didn't remember deciding to stand. Who told you this? He said. I have my own sources, she said, standing as well. I've had them for 3 years. I never use them against you. I want you to hear me say that clearly. I hear you. He was already thinking, the operational part of his mind coming online with the speed that 15 years had made automatic. If Beaumont calls that meeting today, and if the Marchetti situation is still unresolved, and if Reale's people have been feeding information to the Castellano brothers, then by tonight, 3 separate organizations will have coordinated a position on your network's weakness, and you won't have had time to counterbrief anyone. She came around the desk. She was not soft about it. Her face was sharp, working, the face he'd seen across the table at 2 a.m. when the Restrepo situation blew up. You need to get to Marchetti before that meeting happens, and you need someone to call the Castellano brothers from a position they'll respect. They won't take my call right now, he said. They'll take my father's, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. I am not doing this for you, she said, precisely, carefully. I want that stated between us with no ambiguity. If Beaumont consolidates those families, the fallout doesn't stay inside your organization. It destabilizes relationships that affect people my father has spent years protecting. That's why. I understand, he said. She held his gaze for 1 more second, then picked up her phone and walked to the window. He listened to her call her father. She spoke for 90 seconds, concise and specific, laying out the Beaumont development with the economy of someone who has learned to brief people who don't need things explained twice. She listened. She said yes and understood. And then she said, there's one more thing, and she glanced back at Lucian and said, Lucian is here. He came on his own. A pause. I know. I'll let you know what I decide. She ended the call. My father will reach the Castellano brothers within the hour, she said, not as a favor to you, as a management of a situation that's his to manage. And Marchetti, Lucian said. That one is yours, she said. You need to call Richard Cho directly, not through intermediaries. You and Cho, one conversation, you offer him enough transparency about the Reale situation that he understands the destabilization was internal and resolved. He needs to understand that before Beaumont reaches him. Cho will want something. Then give him something, she said. You know what he values. You've sat across from him twice. She looked at him with an expression that was not impatient but was running out of a particular kind of time. Lucian, you have about 4 hours before that meeting in New Orleans changes the shape of your options permanently. Make the call. He pulled out his phone. He found Cho's direct line. He had it. He'd always had it. Evelyn was right. He knew what Cho valued, and he knew how to reach him. He called it. Cho answered on the third ring. Richard, Lucian said, I know about the meeting today. I need 15 minutes. In person. I'll come to you. A pause on Cho's end, then, 4 o'clock, my office. 3, Lucian said. Another pause. 3:30. I'll be there. He ended the call. He looked at Evelyn. 3:30 with Cho. She nodded. She was still holding her phone, standing by the window, and in the light she looked. He tried not to think about how she looked, but the thought arrived anyway. She looked like someone who was very tired and very competent, and had been both of those things for a long time without anyone noticing. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. Real is external communications, he said. What he gave to Beaumont and the Castellanos, I don't know the full scope of it. I don't know what's out there. You said you've been watching the information movement. How bad is it? She looked at him steadily. It's bad, she said. He didn't give them operational detail on the criminal side. He's too careful for that. That would expose him too. What he gave them was the architecture of your legitimate holdings, the structures, the connections, the dependencies. Enough that a coordinated approach from 3 families could surgically compromise the above-ground operation while leaving the underground intact. Which would leave me with nothing that's defensible to the outside world, he said. Which would leave you with nothing, she said. Because the underground operation without the legitimate cover isn't an empire. It's just a criminal enterprise waiting for an indictment. He sat back down, not because he'd decided to, say, his legs made the decision independently. She pulled the chair from beside the desk and sat across from him, not behind the desk this time, just across. Close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there when they met, and the way she held herself when she was working, back straight, hands quiet, attention absolute. There's a way through this, she said, but it requires you to move in the next 2 hours, and it requires you to not make the same calculation error you've been making. Which error specifically? He said. Trying to do it alone, she said. Treating this as a war you fight by consolidating inward. You've spent 15 years building walls. What you needed to build was bridges, and you had one, and you didn't know it, and now you're trying to reconstruct the wall faster than it's falling, and it won't work. She paused. The people who are coming for you aren't coming because you're weak. They're coming because they think you're isolated. The way you stop them is by proving you're not. He looked at her. I am isolated. Right now, she said. Yes. The word hung there between them, neither promise nor denial, just precise. She was always precise. He was only now understanding what precision cost someone, how much work it took to be that clear when everything around you was designed to confiscate. His phone buzzed. Marcus. He answered. Tell me. Beaumont's meeting, Marcus said. His voice was tight. We're getting confirmation from 2 sources. It's not just Castellano and Marchetti adjacent contacts. Beaumont has Vincent Harp on the line, and Harp has been talking to our man in Philadelphia, and Lucian, I think there's a leak still active inside. Something is feeding them our response times. They knew about the Cho call within 20 minutes. Lucian went very still. 20 minutes, he said. I made that call 15 minutes ago. I know, Marcus said. He looked at Evelyn. She was watching his face. Rial is not alone, he said to her, phone still at his ear. There's someone else. She didn't look surprised. That was the worst part. I know, she said. You know who. I have a suspicion, she said carefully. I didn't want to bring it to you without being certain because the name... She stopped. The name is going to be hard. Tell me. She looked at him with something in her face that was almost regret, not for what she was about to say, for the fact that it was true. Garrett, she said, your driver. He had the phone at his ear, and Marcus was saying something, and the 42nd floor office was full of light from all those windows, and Lucian sat very still. Garrett. 8 years. The man who had driven him to Cho's office, who had been in the car for every significant conversation in the last week, including the call with Marcus about Reale, including the call with Vivienne, including the conversation on the way to the Aldwych where Lucien had said Reale's name out loud in a car that belonged to the Blackwood organization and was operated by a man who apparently did not. "Lucien," Marcus said through the phone, "are you there?" "I'm here," he said. His voice was very flat. "I need you to pull Garrett's access codes for the building systems and freeze them in the next 3 minutes. Don't tell him, don't tell anyone. Just do it and call me back." He ended the call. He looked at Evelyn. 8 years, he said. It wasn't a question. "I started watching him about 14 months ago," she said. "There were things, small things, timing inconsistencies. The way certain information arrived at certain places slightly faster than it should have given its source. I couldn't prove it definitively. I kept a record." She reached into the desk drawer and produced a folder. She set it on the desk between them. "This is what I have." He looked at the folder. He did not reach for it immediately. "You've been keeping this," he said, "for 14 months, while living in my house." "While living in my house, too," she said quietly. He picked up the folder. He opened it. It was 18 pages of documented observations, timestamps, cross-references, the kind of systematic record that someone keeps when they know they'll need it to be believed and they're not sure by whom or when. He read the first 5 pages quickly and the last 2 slowly. He closed it. "The Reale connection is in there," she said. "On page 11. Garrett was the conduit between Reale's external contacts and Beaumont's people. Reale gave the information. Garrett managed the live feeds, the timing data, the response monitoring. They built a surveillance architecture inside my own car," he said. "Inside your own life," she said. "For years." He sat for a moment. His hands were on the folder, and the folder was on the desk, and the desk was between them, and beyond the windows, the city was going on without any particular awareness of or interest in what was falling apart on the 42nd floor. Then he stood up. "I need to make a call to the Philadelphia contact before Harp does," he said. "I need a location for that. Not Blackwood infrastructure. Nothing that Garrett has had access to. A clean line from a clean location." "You can use the secure line on the 44th floor," she said. "My father's office. He's not in the building today." "I'd let you use a phone," she said. "Don't make it more than it is." He nodded. "And Lucien." He was already moving toward the door. Her voice stopped him. "When you talk to Philadelphia, and to Cho at 3:30, I need you to understand something about what you're walking into." He turned. "Beaumont's play isn't about your territory," she said. "It never was. He doesn't want what you have. He wants the relationships you have. The legitimate relationships, the financial connections, because those are the things his own operation is missing and can't build from scratch." She paused. "He's not trying to destroy you. He's trying to absorb you. And if you walk into that Cho meeting treating this like a war, you'll lose, because it's not a war. It's an acquisition attempt, and you need to block it like one." He looked at her across the office. "How?" "By making yourself not acquirable," she said. "By demonstrating that the relationships around you are stronger than the pressure being applied, which means that what happens in the next 4 hours isn't about showing force. It's about showing continuity." She looked at him steadily. "You need to be the same Lucien Blackwood at 3:30 that you were before any of this started. Certain, directional, worth betting on." "I'm not sure I am anymore," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's the only honest thing you've said since you walked in." He stood in the doorway for a second. Then he went. The 44th floor was different from the 42nd, quieter, even more stripped of excess, with the specific quality of a room that belongs to one person entirely and has absorbed that person's character over decades. The desk was large and very clean. The chair behind it was leather that had worn soft with use. On the wall to the left was a single photograph. Alexander Carter at a table somewhere, 6 people around him, everyone looking at him. Lucien had seen that photograph before, on Evelyn's dresser 3 years ago. He'd looked at it and not registered it. He'd seen a man at a table and moved on. He sat in the chair across from the desk, not behind it. He would not sit in Alexander Carter's chair, and picked up the secure phone and called the Philadelphia contact directly. The conversation took 11 minutes. It was the most honest 11 minutes Lucien had conducted in a professional context in recent memory, which was not a metric he had ever expected to be working with. He told the Philadelphia man what Reale had done, what Garrett had done, what the shape of Beaumont's play was, and what the consequence would be for every mid-Atlantic operation if Beaumont successfully absorbed even partial control of the Blackwood legitimate structure. He did not beg. He did not threaten. He laid it out. The Philadelphia man listened. At the end of 11 minutes, he said, "I'll reach out to 2 of the Marchetti board members directly, not to reverse the postponement. I'm not in a position to do that, but to ensure they have the correct context before Beaumont reaches them." "That's all I'm asking," Lucian said. "I know what you're asking," the man said, and then quietly, "Whoever put together the briefing you just gave me. That's good work, Lucian. That's not something you put together this afternoon." Lucian looked at the wall, at the photograph. "No," he said, "it's not." He went back to the 42nd floor. Evelyn was on the phone when he came in, standing at the window again, speaking quietly. She held up one finger without turning around. He waited near the door. She finished the call and turned. "My father reached the Castellano brothers 40 minutes ago," she said. "They've agreed to a neutral position on Beaumont's meeting. They'll attend, but not commit." "That buys time," he said. "It buys tonight," she said. "What you do with tonight is up to you." He looked at his watch. 2:47, 43 minutes to Cho. "I need to get across town," he said. "I know." He picked up his coat. He started toward the door again, stopped. "The folder," he said. "The 14 months of documentation, can I take it?" She looked at him. "Why?" "Because Cho is going to need to understand the Garrett and Reale situation in terms that are verifiable," he said. "And because if I walk into that meeting with documentation, it signals that I've already done what needs to be done internally, that I'm not asking him to trust a claim, I'm showing him the record." She was quiet for a moment. Then she went to the desk and picked up the folder and held it out. He took it. Their hands didn't touch. They were both careful about that. "Lucian," she said. He waited. "What you said before," she said, "about the 4 seconds, about why you looked away." She held his eyes. "I heard it. I'm not telling you what it means yet, because I don't know. But I heard it." He nodded. He didn't trust his voice with anything more than that. He went to the elevator. He rode down 42 floors. He walked through the lobby, past the security desk, past the clean stone and the controlled silence, out through the revolving door and into the cold afternoon air. Garrett was at the curb with the car. He had known Garrett would be there. He'd had 45 minutes to decide what to do about Garrett, and he had decided on the way down in the elevator, in the 42 floors between who he was going to be and who he'd been. He stopped on the sidewalk 3 feet from the car. Garrett looked at him through the windshield. Something shifted in the man's face. Almost nothing, barely perceptible, the kind of micro-adjustment that gives itself away precisely by being so carefully small. Lucian walked to the driver's window. Garrett lowered it. "I won't need you today," Lucian said. "Marcus will process your departure from the organization. You'll receive what you're owed under your contract." Garrett looked at him. His face had gone completely neutral, the specific neutrality of someone whose cover is blown and who is now calculating the range of outcomes. "Mr. Blackwood, don't," Lucian said. Just that. Garrett closed his mouth. Lucian stepped back from the car and raised his hand for a cab. One pulled to the curb in under a minute. He got in and gave the driver Cho's address and sat back and looked at the folder in his hands. 14 months of work, 18 pages. Every timestamp, every inconsistency, every cross-reference organized with the kind of patience that is indistinguishable from love, the patient watching of someone who is trying to protect something they're not sure wants to be protected. The cab pulled into traffic. 3:22, 8 minutes to get across Midtown. It would be close. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't know. He answered. "Mr. Blackwood?" The voice was smooth and southern and entirely without warmth, the voice of a man who had learned that warmth signals want, and he preferred not to signal want. "This is Beaumont. I thought we might have a conversation before you walked into your 3:30. Lucian looked at the traffic ahead of them. "How did you get this number?" he said. "The same way I get most things," Beaumont said, "through people who thought they were doing something else." "What do you want?" The same thing everyone wants, Mr. Blackwood, to not waste time." A pause. "I know about the Philadelphia call. I know about the folder your ex-wife gave you. I know you're in a cab heading to Cho's office right now, which suggests your driver situation has been resolved, and I admire the speed with which you're moving. I genuinely do. Another pause. But I want you to consider something before you walk into that building. Say it, Lucian said. The folder helps you with Cho, Beaumont said. The Philadelphia contact buys you neutrality with Castellano tonight. But I still have Harp, and Harp has 3 board members on the Fenwick lender, and the note on that property gets called in 60 days if I don't make a different suggestion to the right people. His voice remained smooth. You can win today and still lose the property in 60 days. You know that. The cab was moving through the light at 53rd Street. What are you proposing? Lucian said. A conversation, Beaumont said. Face to face. Tomorrow. Just to understand each other. And what does understanding each other look like in your version of this? In my version, Beaumont said, you and I are not enemies. We're 2 people who have been positioned against each other by a network of smaller men with smaller interests. Reale benefited from the tension. Garrett benefited from it. I'd like to explore whether we might benefit more from the absence of it. Lucian looked out the window. 57th, 3 blocks. Tomorrow, he said. I'll call you. I look forward to it, Beaumont said. The call ended. Lucian sat in the cab for the remaining 3 blocks with the phone in one hand and the folder in the other, and he ran the math on Beaumont the way he ran math on everything, looking for the variable he couldn't account for, the assumption baked into the proposal that was going to cost him something he hadn't budgeted. He found it on the second pass. Beaumont didn't want a conversation. Beaumont wanted a reading. He wanted 45 minutes in a room with Lucian to assess the level of damage, to measure how much pressure the structure could still take, to decide whether to push harder or whether there was a more profitable arrangement available. He was offering a conversation. What he was actually doing was requesting an audit. The cab stopped. Cho's building. Lucian got out, paid, stood on the sidewalk for 3 seconds. 3:29. He looked up at the building. He looked at the folder. He thought about Evelyn in the office, 42 floors up in a building 4 blocks east, doing whatever she was doing after he walked out, deciding whatever she was deciding about what he'd said and what it was worth. He thought about the 4 seconds. He thought about what it would have cost him to not look away, what that conversation would have required, what acknowledging in that room, in front of those 30 people, what she was to him, what it would have taken and what it would have meant. He walked into the building. The lobby security had his name. He was expected. They sent him up immediately. Cho was waiting in a conference room on the 18th floor. A compact man in his early 50s. Sharp eyes behind steel-framed glasses, the kind of face that processed information in real time and didn't display the processing. They shook hands. They sat. Cho looked at the folder on the table between them. Start talking, Cho said. Lucian opened the folder. He talked for 40 minutes. He laid it out the same way he'd laid it out for Philadelphia. The Reale history, the Garrett access, the architecture of what had been fed externally and to whom. He walked Cho through the documentation. He answered every question Cho asked, and Cho asked precise, surgical questions that demonstrated he'd already been thinking about the structural integrity of the Blackwood-Marchetti relationship and had his own list of concerns that he was now cross-referencing against what Lucian was showing him. At the end of 40 minutes, Cho closed the folder. He looked at Lucian across the table. The documentation, he said. This isn't yours. No, Lucian said. It's thorough, Cho said. Whoever put this together understood the architecture of your legitimate operation at a level that... He stopped. This was internal. Yes. Cho looked at him. Then he said carefully, I heard about the divorce. Lucian held his gaze. Yes. Cho was quiet for a moment. He picked up his pen and turned it in his fingers once, a thinking gesture, then set it down. I'll recommend to the Marchetti board that the signing be rescheduled, he said. 2 weeks. That gives you time to complete the internal restructuring and provide us with a clean organizational chart. He paused. One more thing. Ask, Lucian said. Beaumont called me this morning, Cho said. Before you did. Lucian kept his face still. He suggested that the Marchetti group might find the current instability an opportunity to renegotiate certain terms, Cho said. He was very smooth about it, very reasonable sounding. He looked at Lucian steadily. I didn't like him. No, Lucian said. Most people don't once they understand what he's doing. What is he doing? Cho said. He's running an audit disguised as a negotiation, Lucian said. He wants to know how much is left standing before he decides whether to buy or burn. Cho looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his pen again. 2 weeks, he said. Clean organizational chart. And Lucian. He met his eyes. Whatever you did to get that documentation, whoever helped you, that's the kind of help you don't throw away twice. Lucian looked at the folder on the table. I know, he said. He left Cho's office at 4:47. The street outside was full of the particular energy of late afternoon Manhattan. Everyone moving, everyone purposeful, everyone with somewhere to be that wasn't this block. He stood on the sidewalk and felt the cold through his coat and the folder under his arm and the weight of the day behind him and the night ahead of him. Beaumont tomorrow. The Fenwick property in 60 days. Reale's departure to manage. The organizational chart for Marchetti. The internal restructuring. The list was long and the foundation it rested on was cracked, and the only reason any of it was still standing at all was because of 18 pages compiled over 14 months by a woman who owed him nothing and had documented his vulnerabilities anyway, and then handed them over because the alternative was worse for people she actually cared about protecting. He pulled out his phone. He found her name. He typed, Cho rescheduled, 2 weeks. Thank you for the folder. He looked at the message for a moment. He added, and for the other thing, he sent it. He stood on the sidewalk and waited. 40 seconds later, his screen lit up. Her reply was 4 words. Don't waste the 2 weeks. He read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked up at the city above him. All that glass, all those lit windows, the particular opacity of a place where everything important happens behind surfaces that don't show what's behind them. He started walking. He had 1 call left to make before the night was over, and the number he was going to dial was not Marcus or Philadelphia or Cho or Beaumont. It was a number he had not called since she walked out his front door, and the call was going to require him to say something he had never once said in 15 years of running an organization built on the principle that need was a liability and admitting it was a fatal error. He walked a full block before he stopped and took the phone out again. He found her name. He pressed call. It rang twice. She answered. Lucian, she said. Quiet. Careful. Waiting. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold with the city going in all directions around him, and he looked at the pavement under his feet, and he said what needed to be said in the only way he knew how to say it, which was without any framework around it, without defense or calculation, just the sentence by itself. I need your help, he said, not just tonight. I need to understand what I've been missing, and I think you're the only person who can show me what that is. I know that's not fair to ask. I know I don't have the right. I'm asking anyway. The silence on her end lasted long enough that he thought she might hang up. Then she said, Come back to the tower. He took a cab back to Carter Tower. Not because he couldn't get another driver in 20 minutes, because the act of getting in the car that Garrett had been driving, even with Garrett gone, felt wrong in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. Some contaminations you don't ride out. You walk away from the vehicle and you find a different one and you pay the $12 and you sit in the back and you look at your own hands on your knees and you think about what you just said on a sidewalk to a woman who had every reason to hang up. She hadn't hung up. Come back to the tower. 4 words. Same economy she'd always had with language. The same refusal to give more than was needed, which he had once interpreted as reserve and now understood was precision. She said exactly what she meant and nothing around it. And he had spent 6 years mistaking that for distance. The cab dropped him at the tower at 5:19. The lobby security recognized him this time. No phone call to confirm, just a nod and a gesture toward the elevator and a card that led him up to 42 without an escort. That registered. He filed it. She was standing at the window when he came in. Same window, same position as that afternoon, looking out at the city going dark at its edges, the sky above Midtown holding its last gray light before the evening took it. She didn't turn when he came in. He closed the door. He set his coat on the chair near the entrance. He waited. My father wants to meet with you, she said to the window. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. About Beaumont. About everything. She turned now. She looked at him across the room with the careful expression that had been her face for most of the day. The one he was beginning to understand was not coldness, but self-protection. The look of someone who had been hurt in a specific place and had learned to keep that place covered until they were sure of what they were dealing with. He's been watching the situation develop since the night I left the estate. He has a read on Beaumont that's more complete than what you have. What is his read? Lucian said. That Beaumont's play collapses without the Harpy connection, she said, and that the Harpy connection is more fragile than it looks because Vincent Harp has his own exposure on the Fenwick lender situation. He's been using the same network to leverage a position in a separate portfolio, and if the lender calls one note, it creates a review that affects his holdings too. She paused. Beaumont doesn't know that. My father does. That's a significant piece of information, Lucian said carefully. Yes, she said. Why is your father giving it to me? She looked at him directly. He's not giving it to you. He's giving it to the situation. Because the situation, if it resolves badly, doesn't stay inside your organization. He's told me that twice now, and I believe him. She held his gaze. But I want you to understand what tomorrow's meeting is, and what it isn't. Tell me. It's not a rescue, she said. My father doesn't rescue people. He manages environments. If he meets with you tomorrow, it's because he's decided that a stable Blackwood network serves his interests better than a destabilized one, and he will help you stabilize it on terms that he defines. And those terms will be things you agree to not because you're forced to, but because they're reasonable. She paused. He is always reasonable. That's what makes him effective. What are the terms likely to be? Lucian said. I don't know specifically, she said, but generally, transparency about the legitimate structure, a restructuring of the board of the holding company that includes at least one independent director from outside your existing network, and possibly... She stopped. Possibly what? She looked at him steadily. Some acknowledgement of what happened the night I left. Not to him personally, just on record, in whatever form that takes. Lucian absorbed that. He wants an acknowledgement. He wants his daughter to not have been publicly humiliated by people who thought they could do it without consequence, she said. Not heated, just clear. He's a father. The financial architecture is how he expresses it, but underneath that, it's just a father. Lucian looked at the window, at the city beyond it, all those lights coming on floor by floor as the dark arrived. And you, he said, what do you want? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. I want to know if you meant what you said on the phone, she said finally. About needing to understand what you've been missing, whether that was strategy or whether it was the other thing. It wasn't strategy, he said. How do I know that? You don't, he said. I can't prove it to you tonight. I could prove it over time, maybe, if you were willing to let me. But tonight it's just a statement, and you have no particular reason to believe it. She looked at him. 6 years, she said. I spent 6 years being very careful about what I asked for and how I asked for it. I made myself small in that house. Not because anyone forced me to, because I thought it was the price of being near you. I thought if I was quiet enough and useful enough and present enough without demanding to be seen, eventually you would... She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. I kept thinking that. Evelyn, I'm not finished, she said. Not sharp, just firm. I kept thinking that the right moment would come, and you would look at me the way I needed you to look at me, and it would be worth it. And then your mother pointed at my face, and you looked at the floor, and I understood that the moment wasn't coming, that I had been waiting for something that wasn't going to arrive because you didn't know it was supposed to. She paused. That's the hardest part. Not that you failed me, that you didn't know you were supposed to be looking. He stood in the room with that and didn't try to answer it immediately. He let it be said and he let it take up the space it needed, because the reflex to defend or explain or reframe was very strong, and it was exactly the wrong thing. You're right, he said, about all of it. She looked at him, searching. I don't know how to do what you needed, he said. I don't know how to be seen and see simultaneously. I know how to manage. I know how to assess and position and protect. I built a whole world around those capacities, and I called it strength, and for 15 years it worked. He looked at his hands. The part where you sit across from someone and let yourself know how much you need them. I never built that. I don't know if I can build it. I know, she said quietly. I'm not saying it won't happen, he said. I'm saying I'm starting from somewhere very far back, and I know what that cost you, and I don't have the right to ask you to pay it. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Go home, Lucian. Come back tomorrow at 7:30. We'll go up to meet my father together. He looked at her. Together. It's the only way it makes sense, she said. If you walk in there alone, it's a business meeting. If we walk in together, it's something that he'll understand differently, something that might change the shape of what's possible. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you what that means. I'm telling you what it is. What is it? He said. She was quiet for a moment. A first step, she said, toward something I don't have a name for yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. But a step in a direction that isn't the direction we've been going. She paused. Don't read more into it than that. If you read more into it than that, I'll know, and it will be over before it starts. He nodded. 7:30. 7:30, she said. He picked up his coat. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Evelyn, he said. She waited. Thank you, he said. For the folder. For today. For answering the phone. He paused. For not making it easy. She said nothing, but something in her face, not softening exactly, more like a door that had been closed moving 1 degree on its hinge, let him leave. He went down in the elevator. He crossed the lobby. He went out into the city. He did not call anyone. He walked 14 blocks in the cold before he got in another cab. 14 blocks of Manhattan in the dark. And he needed all of them. The meeting with Alexander Carter lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. It was not a warm meeting, and it was not designed to be. Alexander Carter was 70 years old and had not become what he was by extending warmth at business meetings, even meetings that were also personal in a way that complicated the category. He was courteous. He was thorough. He was, as Evelyn had predicted, entirely reasonable, which was more demanding than hostility would have been because it left no room for the alternative postures, defiance, grievance, self-justification, that a hostile interlocutor would have invited. Lucian had none of those postures available anyway. He had thought about that on the walk the night before, and again on the cab ride this morning, and he had arrived at the conclusion that the only available posture was the truth of the situation, plainly stated, which was, I built something real, and I maintained it imperfectly, and there are people trying to take it apart who don't deserve to have it, and I am here because I cannot stop them alone, and your daughter is the reason I know that. He didn't say it exactly that way. He said it in the language of finance and organizational structure and risk management, but that was the content. Alexander Carter listened. He asked questions. He looked at Lucian with those steady dark eyes that he had given his daughter, the eyes that processed without displaying the processing, and he said less than Lucian expected, and what he said landed with more weight than a longer speech would have. At the end of the meeting, Carter set his hands flat on the desk. I'll make one call to the Fenwick lender today, he said. 1. It won't reverse the note. It will extend the review period to 90 days instead of 60. He paused. In that 90 days, you will restructure the holding company board. You will appoint an independent director, and you will have a conversation with Beaumont that I will help you prepare for, the outcome of which will be that he walks away without having gained anything meaningful. He looked at Lucian steadily. In exchange for this, I want nothing from you financially. What I want is simpler. Ask, Lucian said. Carter looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn, who was sitting to Lucian's left, and the look between father and daughter was brief and private in the way of people who have an entire language between them that has been developed over decades and requires no words. He looked back at Lucian. Don't waste her time, he said. Whatever this is or isn't between you, don't waste her time. She has given enough of it to things that didn't see her. She won't do it again, and she shouldn't have to. He paused. That's all? Lucian looked at Alexander Carter and understood that he was looking at a man who was telling him the most important term of the arrangement, and that the rest of it, the financial architecture, the board restructuring, the Beaumont preparation, was the packaging around this one sentence. I understand, Lucian said. Carter nodded once. The meeting was over. In the elevator going down, Evelyn stood beside him, and they both looked at the doors and said nothing for a moment. The building hummed around them. The numbers descended. He doesn't do that for everyone, she said. I know, Lucian said. He did it because he believes people can change, she said. Not easily, not cleanly, but actually. She paused. He told me that once about someone who had wronged him badly. I thought he was wrong at the time. I think I was too young to understand what he meant. What did he mean? Lucian said. That the capacity to change doesn't redeem what came before it, she said. It just determines what comes after. She looked at the elevator doors. The before is what it was. You can't fix it. You can only be honest about it and decide what the after looks like. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. They walked out together into the Carter Tower lobby, past the security desk, through the revolving door, into a cold morning with thin light coming from the east, and the city already fully awake around them. They stood on the sidewalk. The Beaumont meeting is this afternoon, Lucian said. I know. My father's assistant will send you the briefing before noon. Will you be there? She looked at him. No, she said. That one is yours. You need to walk into that room without me. Not because I'm not... She stopped, chose the next words carefully. Not because I'm withholding. Because if I'm in the room, Beaumont will make it about me and my father, and you'll spend the whole meeting trying to manage the optics instead of the substance. You need to face him on your own terms. And if he pushes on the Fenwick note, then you tell him the review period has been extended and that you have the 90 days you need and that you'd like to discuss what a non-adversarial relationship between your organizations could look like going forward. She looked at him steadily. You don't threaten him. You don't posture. You give him a door that doesn't cost you anything to open, and you let him decide whether to walk through it. If he does, you have one less problem. If he doesn't, then I deal with it. Then you deal with it, she said, with what you have, which is more than you had 3 days ago. He looked at her on the sidewalk in the morning light. She looked back. Evelyn, he said. Don't, she said, quietly, not unkindly. I need to say one more thing. She waited. I know what Reale was, he said, what he built, what he used, what he was doing inside my organization for years. I know what Garrett was. I know what my mother did, and why, and what it cost. He looked at her. But the thing that actually brought it down, the thing that gave Reale the opening and Garrett the access and Beaumont the angle, it was the 4 seconds. It was the room and the 30 people and me looking at the floor. He paused. Everything else is a consequence of that. I want you to know that I know that. Not because it changes what happened, just because you deserve to have it said clearly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, I know you know. How? Because you wouldn't be standing on this sidewalk if you didn't, she said. You'd have sent Marcus. He almost smiled. She almost let him see her almost smile. 7:30 tomorrow, she said. I want a status update on the Beaumont meeting. I'll call you tonight. Text, she said. I'm not ready for phone calls at night yet. Text, he agreed. She turned and went back through the revolving door. He stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. The Beaumont meeting happened at 3 that afternoon at a hotel in Midtown, neutral territory, Beaumont's choice, which Lucian had accepted without comment. Beaumont was already in the room when he arrived, seated with a glass of water and the particular posture of someone who had mentally rehearsed this several times and was comfortable with all versions of it. He was younger than Lucian had expected. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, the kind of Southern gentleman presentation that was so polished it had its own kind of edge. He stood when Lucian came in, extended his hand, smiled in a way that was technically warm. Mr. Blackwood, he said, I appreciate you making the time. Of course, Lucian said. They sat. Beaumont talked for the first 7 minutes. It was a well-constructed 7 minutes. A tour of the regional landscape, an acknowledgement of recent instability, a gentle mapping of where various interests were currently positioned, all of it framed as observation rather than as anything Beaumont had engineered, which was a polished performance that would have been convincing to someone who didn't have 18 pages of documentation and an 8 a.m. meeting with Alexander Carter in the same week. Lucian let him finish, then he said, I know about Harp's exposure on the Fenwick network. Beaumont's expression didn't change. That was how Lucian knew he'd landed it correctly. The absence of visible reaction was its own form of confirmation. The lender's review period has been extended, Lucian said. 90 days. I have what I need to satisfy the note within that window. What I don't have is the need for an ongoing adversarial relationship with your organization or with anyone in your coalition. He paused. I'm proposing we end this where it is. You withdraw the pressure on the HARP channel, which costs you a relationship that was leveraged on false assumptions anyway. And I don't pursue the question of how Reale's information found its way to you specifically. He said it the same way Alexander Carter said things. Not loudly, just levelly, just as fact. Beaumont was quiet for a moment. That's a very confident position, he said, for someone who was... I know what my position was 4 days ago, Lucian said. I'm telling you what it is today. Beaumont looked at him. He was recalculating. Lucian could see the process happening behind those careful eyes, the reassessment of the variables, the new understanding that the Blackwood situation had shifted in ways that Beaumont's information, which had been supplied by Reale and fed through Garrett, had not captured. The Carter connection, Beaumont said carefully, is not a vulnerability, Lucian said. It never was. It was a resource that I didn't know I had. Now I know. Beaumont was quiet again. Then he said, The Castellano brothers attended my meeting last night. I know, Lucian said, and I know they didn't commit to anything. A pause. No, Beaumont said. They didn't. They looked at each other across the table. I think, Beaumont said slowly, that we may have been working from outdated information. I think so too, Lucian said. The regional landscape benefits from stability, Beaumont said. It was a retreat dressed as a principle, and they both knew it, and the knowing was part of the agreement. It does, Lucian said. They talked for another 30 minutes about nothing that mattered. Industry pleasantries, regional developments, the abstract future. At the end of it, they shook hands and parted with the particular courtesy of two people who have just agreed not to be enemies without going so far as to be friends. In the cab going home to the estate, Lucian texted Evelyn, Beaumont meeting done. He's standing down. Detail tomorrow. He watched the city go past outside. It was late afternoon and the light had gone gold the way it does in October when the angle is right, sitting on the surfaces of buildings and turning them amber, and Manhattan looked briefly beautiful the way it does when the weather cooperates. She replied in 4 minutes, Good. Get some sleep. He looked at those 3 words for a moment. He put the phone in his pocket. He slept for 11 hours. The weeks that followed were not easy and were not designed to be. The holding company board was restructured in 22 days. The independent director, a woman named Kathleen Morse, who had spent 20 years in institutional compliance and who had been recommended by Evelyn through a channel that Lucian didn't ask too much about, proved to be exactly as demanding as Evelyn had suggested she would be, which was demanding in the specific way that is useful rather than obstructive. She found 3 additional exposure points in the portfolio architecture within her first 2 weeks that Lucian had not known existed. 2 of them were legacy issues from before his tenure. One of them was Reale. Reale departed the organization in 31 days, as agreed. His exit was announced internally as a retirement. Externally, it made no noise at all, which was the way both of them had wanted it. Lucian had one final conversation with him, brief, in the Aldwych, the same corner table. Reale looked smaller than he had before. Not physically, just reduced in some way. The way things look when the pressure around them has been released and you can see for the first time that they were borrowing dimension from it. I want you to know, Lucian said, that I understood what you were doing and why. I'm not going to tell you it wasn't rational. Reale looked at him. Then why wasn't it enough? Because rational isn't the same as right, Lucian said. And I think you knew that. I think you've known it for a while. Reale didn't respond. He picked up his coffee, took a drink, set it down. The filing system calm was still there, but it was quieter now, less functional. Your father would have handled it differently, Reale said. Yes, Lucian said. He would have. But I'm not my father. He meant it as a neutral statement of fact. It landed like something more. He left the Aldwych and didn't go back. Vivian was the hardest part. He had waited 2 weeks before he had the real conversation with her, not because he needed the time to prepare. He had known what needed to be said within 48 hours of the night everything broke open, but because Vivian needed the 2 weeks. She needed to understand the full scope of what had happened before she could be in a room with him, and not spend the first 20 minutes defending herself against information she was still processing. He went to her sitting room on a Tuesday evening. She was in her usual chair, a book open on her lap that she wasn't reading. He sat across from her. "I'm not here to relitigate what happened," he said. "I'm here because I need to understand something, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked at him. The defensive architecture in her expression was very high, very practiced. He waited for it. "What do you need to understand?" she said. "Why?" he said simply. "Not the strategy of it, not the reasoning you gave me about managing risk and protecting the family, the actual reason." She was quiet. "Mother," she looked at the window. "She was better than you at certain things," Vivian said, not loudly. "Things that mattered, business things, people things. She read a room faster than you did, and she was quieter about it, and I watched people respond to her without her doing anything, and I knew—" She stopped. "You knew what?" he said. "That if she ever decided to stop being quiet about it," Vivian said, "she would become the more important person in the room, and you wouldn't notice until it had already happened." She paused. "I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" Lucian said. "From someone who was actually helping me." "From becoming dependent on someone I didn't control," she said. Her voice was flat, honest. "I didn't trust her, Lucian. Not because of who she was, because of how much you would have needed her if you ever actually saw her. And I couldn't—" She stopped again. "Say it," he said. "I couldn't let you need someone I didn't control," she said. It cost her something to say it. He could hear the cost. "I know what that makes me." He looked at his mother in the chair in the room she had presided over for 3 decades. He looked at her and tried to see both things simultaneously. The woman who had spent his entire life protecting him in the ways she knew how, and the woman who had let that impulse metastasize into something that had nearly destroyed everything he built. "It makes you someone who was afraid," he said. "I understand that. I'm not forgiving it yet, but I understand it." She looked at him. "What happens now?" she said. "You take a step back from the operational decisions," he said. "Not from the family, not from me, but from the business, permanently." He paused. "I should have done that a long time ago. That's on both of us." She looked at the window again. "And Evelyn," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not something I can tell you about right now," he said. "It's not yours to know yet." Vivian absorbed that. She didn't push. That itself was new. "All right," she said. He stood up. He went to the door. "Lucien," she said. He stopped. "I know what I did," she said. "I want you to know that I know." He nodded. "I do know that," he said. "It's a start." He went downstairs. With Evelyn, things moved the way ice moves. So slowly you couldn't see it in the moment, only in the aggregate over time. They talked every few days at first, usually about the operational situation because that was the framework they both had available, and because the operational situation was real and required actual conversation. She had thoughts on the Morse appointment that were useful. She had a perspective on the Marchetti renegotiation that he hadn't considered. She gave these things freely and without calculation, and he received them the same way, which was not easy. The reflex to assess the angle, to look for what she was building toward, kept firing, and he had to consciously set it aside. She was not building toward anything. She was just helping because helping was what she did. He understood that now. He understood it cost her something, and that she gave it anyway, and that there was a specific kind of person who operates that way. Not from weakness, not from need, not from the hope of reciprocation, but because withholding was a foreign language to her in contexts where she was in. He was trying to understand if he was still in. He thought he was. He wasn't sure if that was what she needed yet. She called him on a Thursday night in the 3rd week, which was the first time she'd called rather than texted, and he noticed it and said nothing about it. "The Fenwick note," she said. "Marcus's restructuring plan. I looked at the numbers." "And?" "You can satisfy it in 60 days if you restructure the Mid-Atlantic holdings the way Morse suggested, and you bring the Marchetti deal to close by the 15th. She paused. "You could do it in 45 if you were willing to sell the Breyer property in Connecticut." He was quiet. "I know you don't want to sell Breyer," she said. "It was my father's," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not telling you to. I'm telling you it's an option if the timeline gets tight." He thought about it for a moment. About his father. About the Aldwych and Real's exit. and the way that history moved through a family, whether you managed it or not. Maybe, he said. Not yet. Okay, she said. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind that has something in it. Evelyn, he said. Yes. I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer, even if the honest answer is not yet, or I don't know. She was quiet, waiting. Are we? He stopped, started again. Is there a version of this where we? I don't know, she said. Not unkindly. Not quickly either. She had sat with the question for a moment before answering, which told him something. I think there might be. I think that's why I'm still having this conversation, instead of having handed you the folder and wished you well and closed the door. She paused. But I need you to understand something, Lucian. If there's a version of this, it looks different than what we had before. It has to. I know, he said. I'm not going to be invisible again, she said. I'm not going to make myself small. I'm not going to wait for you to see me. If I am in a room, I am in the room. If I have a thought, I say it. If I need something, I ask for it. Her voice was steady, not defiant, just clear. The same clarity she'd always had that he'd spent 6 years failing to honor. That's the version. Take it or leave it. I want to take it, he said. I know you want to, she said. I'm asking if you're capable of it. He sat with that. I don't know yet, he said. I think I might be. I want to find out. She was quiet for a moment. Then show up tomorrow, she said. Same as today, and the day after. That's all it is. That's all it is, he repeated. Good night, Lucian. Good night. He set the phone down on the desk in the study, the same study where he'd sat the night she left, with the untouched glass, looking at the empty chair across from him. The lamp was on. The room was quiet. The Hudson Valley was dark outside the window, the river a black line he could just make out below the low clouds. He thought about everything that had broken and everything that had been revealed by the breaking and the specific ratio of those two things that was still undecided. How much was loss and how much was exposure? How much of what had collapsed needed to collapse because it was built wrong, and how much was simply gone? He didn't have the answer to that yet. He sat in the study for a while and let the not having the answer be what it was. 6 weeks after the night she left, the Marchetti deal closed on the 14th. 14 days inside the window she'd identified. He texted her when Marcus confirmed it. Marchetti closed. 14th. Her reply came in 2 minutes. I know, Cho called me. He stared at that for a moment. He typed, He called you? She replied, We've been talking. He's interesting. He smiled, actually smiled, alone in his office, in a way that felt unfamiliar in his own face. He typed, Are you trying to steal my business relationships? She replied, Depends on how you look at it. He put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. 3 months after the night she left, they had dinner. Not a meeting, not a discussion of the operational situation, though that came up because it was real, and both of them were in it. Just dinner at a small restaurant in the West Village that had no connection to either of their worlds, where they were not Blackwood and Carter, but just two people with a long and complicated history who were trying to figure out if the future looked anything like the past, or whether it was something different they didn't have a word for yet. She ordered without looking at the menu because she'd been here before, which meant this place was hers, not his, and he understood that was intentional and accepted it. They talked about Morse, about Vivian's adjustment to the step back, which was incremental and imperfect and ongoing, about the Fenwick property, which had been satisfied in 62 days, about the Breyer property, which he had not sold and did not think he would. At the end of dinner, walking out into the cold, she said, You're different. He looked at her. Different how? You listen now, she said. Before you heard. There's a difference. He thought about that. When did it change? She considered it. The Cho meeting. He told me how you used the folder, how you presented it. She paused. You could have claimed credit for the documentation. You didn't. It wasn't mine to claim credit for, he said. No, she said. It wasn't. She looked at him. That's the difference. They stood on the sidewalk in the cold. A cab went by. Someone's music from an open window 2 floors up, something old he didn't recognize. I have something to tell you, he said. She waited. I sold the Briar property, he said. She blinked. You said... I said not yet, he said. 3 weeks ago felt like yet. Last week didn't anymore. He looked at her. I don't need to hold on to things that belong to someone else's version of me. My father built what he built. I've been building something different, and I think I need to let what's different be different. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face shifted. That door again, a degree further on its hinge. What did you do with the money? She said. Cleared the last of the Fenwick restructuring debt, he said, and endowed a small financial literacy program through a foundation Morse connected me with. He paused. My mother's idea, actually. Evelyn looked at him. Your mother, she said. She's trying, he said, imperfectly. In the way people try when they know they owe something they can't fully repay. She was quiet for a moment. Tell her... She stopped. No, I'll tell her myself, eventually. He nodded. They stood on the sidewalk for another moment. Lucian, she said. Yeah. Don't send a car for me next time, she said. I'll meet you. He looked at her. Okay, he said. She turned and walked toward the avenue. He watched her go, the straight back, the unhurried pace, the way she moved through the city like someone who belonged to it and always had, who had never needed anyone else's name or architecture or protection to be exactly where she was going. She reached the corner and turned. She didn't look back. He stood there after she was gone. The cold was sharp. The street was quiet in the way of city streets that have absorbed the whole day's noise and finally stopped. Above him, someone closed a window and the music cut off. And it was just the street and the cold and the dim-lit storefronts and the distance between where he was and where she'd been. He had lost and found and broken and begun in the span of 3 months. He had been stripped of things he thought were structure and discovered they were scaffolding. He had held on to things he thought were his and found they belonged to a version of himself he was done being. He had let go of things that weren't his to hold, including, finally, the thing that had cost him the most, the idea that power was what held a life together. It wasn't power, it was attention. It was the willingness to look, to stay looking when what you saw demanded something from you, to not look at the floor when the room got hard. He had been 15 years building an empire and 3 months understanding what it was for. He started walking toward the avenue. Somewhere north of him, 42 floors up above Midtown, the city spread out in every direction under a clear October sky, and a woman who had never needed anyone to know her name was living her life without him in it and making it look natural, because for her, it was. He didn't know what came next. He knew what he was going to do tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Show up. Same as today. That was all it was. That was enough to start.